Talking about the Middle East this morning and the disruption that Donald Trump has caused in the Middle East. And just so people that are watching going, oh, there they go again, just blindly attacking Donald Trump. I want you to talk about the column you wrote a couple of weeks ago where you're actually encouraging Donald Trump to do exactly what he did when he went to the Middle East, and that is give Netanyahu the cold shoulder. Why was that important?
Well, basically what Netanyahu has done with all previous presidents, Joe, is do an end run around them, leveraging Congress against them. By the way, whether it was Democrats or Republicans, particularly evangelicals in Congress. Along comes Trump, and he's basically blocked that move. All Republicans are now lined up behind him. So Netanyahu cannot pull that lever anymore. And I don't think without Trump, we would have any hope of a hostage deal right now, because Netanyahu's own political survival depends on him continuing the war. So I think it's good what the president did. I think it's also really good what the president did in opening a dialogue with the new leader of Syria. Syria is such a keystone country. Joe, some countries, when they're decapitated, they implode. Other countries, they explode. Syria is a country that explodes. It sends instability all over the region. And if you fix Syria, you actually can fix Lebanon, Iraq. It really opens the way for a lot of new possibilities. And on Iran, I'm glad he's negotiating with Iran. I want to see what deal he strikes. But this is where Trump's just sort of willingness to turn over the table, throw all the cards up, think of everything new and fresh, I think is very healthy in a region that's completely encrusted.
25 years ago, around 25 years ago, I can't believe how old we are, Tom, you wrote, I believe, Alexis and the Olive Tree, and you talked about how the finances of the Middle East would trump eventually, pardon the pun, the religion and thousands and thousands of years of just infighting. And I'm curious if this trip, even though for whatever purposes Donald Trump had in mind when he went to this trip, I'm wondering if him talking to Saudi Arabia and UAE and the Qataris about business, instead of going to Israel and continuing to try to broker a peace deal that's just never coming, at least not for now. I'm wondering if you sort of see that as moving in the direction, more of a commercial direction that you were talking about in that book.
Joe, it's a really good question. I arrived in Beirut as a cub reporter in 1979. The first 4 stories I covered were the Iranian Revolution, the takeover of the Grand Mosque in Mecca, the signing of the Camp David Peace Treaty, and actually the inauguration of a port in a little obscure town by Queen Elizabeth II called Jebel Ali Port in Dubai. And what you saw there was the tension between the forces of integration in the region, globalization of Dubai, Camp David, and the disintegrated forces, the takeover of the mosque in Mecca and the Iranian Revolution. What's happened in the last year, and by the way, as a result of something Netanyahu did, the destruction of Iran's threat network in Lebanon, in Syria, and the weakening of Iran, basically has tilted the whole region, as you suggested, Joe, toward the forces of inclusion. Netanyahu set that off. The tragedy of the moment is that Bibi Netanyahu will not harvest what he sowed, because to take advantage of this inclusion, the fact that the forces of inclusion are now winning, all right, he has to do a deal with the Palestinian Authority, open the way to a 2-state solution. I was just in Israel. I told Israelis, your leader is making the worst trade in Jewish history. He's trading peace with Saudi Arabia, the most important Muslim nation, for peace with Smotrich and the other right-wing goofballs in his cabinet. It's a terrible, terrible trade. And the fact that Trump is beating him over the head on that, I say hallelujah.
Tom, let me ask you about Russia as we bounce around the globe this morning. President Trump came out with a bit of a readout yesterday of a call with Vladimir Putin that lasted more than an hour. Not terribly productive. It doesn't look like they moved any closer to a ceasefire or negotiations to end the war. Consistently, President Trump has placed the burden on Ukraine, on Zelensky, to give concessions to end the war. Where do you see this headed, and how efficiently, how effectively has Vladimir Putin played this president, frankly?
Well, Willie, Donald Trump is not a Russian agent. I want to make that very clear. But man, he sure knows how to play one on television. Because when I hear his readout of the call with Putin, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Pete Hegseth, not as Secretary of Defense, as a commentator on Fox TV. Oh, I talked to Putin and man, he's mad. He's going to hit back at Ukraine. Well, what did you say? Okay. I don't need you to tell me that. He acts like a Fox commentator when it comes to Russia, not an American president exercising our leverage. Richard Haas and others said this earlier. Trump came into office thinking that basically there was a misunderstanding in Ukraine, that we just weren't nice enough to Vladimir Putin, that he wants peace and Zelensky wants peace. No, Vladimir Putin wants victory. Zelensky wants to preserve his country. And until we understand that the war won't end until Putin is dissuaded from the prospect of any kind of victory, we're just going to be spinning our wheels there. And it's going to get more and more dangerous.
Tom, I'm happy to see you here today because you're the only person that I know of that could clear up some mysteries surrounding this entire episode in the Middle East. And I'm referring to the atrocities that occurred nearly 20 months ago in Israel when Hamas massacred so many Israeli citizens. So today I'd like to ask you why the delay and the refusal to really get the hostage situation taken care of. Why is there such a lot of consternation about the behavior of the Israeli army in Gaza? And why is Bibi Netanyahu constantly, nearly every day, placing himself above this critical situation that is slowly destroying what has been happening in terms of peace offerings in the Middle East?
Mike, let me begin by saying Hamas started this war. It is a terrible, a jihadi fascist organization that has been a curse on the Palestinian people. And what it did on October 7th, killing Israeli mothers in front of their kids in front of their parents, was disgusting and vile. Not only that, if you think of where Hamas is today, what is their position, Mike? Their position is, we will stop the war. We will return the hostages and the bodies that we are holding, which itself is grotesque. We will do that if Israel will get out of Gaza and agree to a permanent ceasefire. Oh, wait a minute. Get out of Gaza and agree to a permanent ceasefire. What did you guys have on October 6th, the day before this war? You had Israel out of Gaza and a permanent ceasefire. So Hamas has fought this whole war, exposed all of its people, basically, to get back to where it was on the day before the war. Now, all of that said, Israel's response from day one by Netanyahu has been the most incoherent, inconceivable war I imagine. They have fought a war, Mike, for over a year and a half without still defining an endgame. They won't do that because there are only three possible endgames. Permanent Israeli occupation. The Israeli public is not up for that. It would be impossibly costly, both morally and financially. Partnering with the Palestinian Authority to create a new structure to replace Hamas. Netanyahu won't do that because the right wing in his government will throw him out if he does. Or turning Gaza into Mogadishu, a kind of land of vast warlords. And Netanyahu, to this day, refuses to choose between those three because his own political future depends on keeping the war going. It is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, a leader putting his own political future ahead of the fate and of the hostages and the future of his own country. And he needs to be called out for that. It is shameful.
Tom, let's turn you to domestic matters now and the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill. It has received a fair amount of criticism. We talked at the top of the show as to what it would mean for the nation's potential long-term fiscal health. Elon Musk, who up until a few weeks ago was basically co-president, has turned into a sharp critic of this bill with real concerns. Give us your sense as to what worries you about the track that these Republicans in Congress have created, a glide path for Trump's agenda here.
Well, John, if you start out with the principle that if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, that's this bill. How should we be doing policy today? I want to take you back 20 years ago, I was in Singapore. I was interviewing a central banker there. He said, you Americans, he said, we Singaporeans, we live in a thatched hut. We feel every change of wind, every change of temperature, and we quickly adapt to it. You Americans, it's like you live in a brick house where you don't care whatever's going on outside, no doors, no windows. What do I mean by that? If you're going to do a big, beautiful bill, the first thing you have to do is say, what world am I living in? What are the big trends in this world? My answer to that would be two things. One is we're moving from an industrial age ecosystem built on combustion engines, coal, oil, and gas, okay, to a 21st century ecosystem built on batteries, electric vehicles, robots, autonomous vehicles, and artificial intelligence. That's the world that we're basically going into. What do you need to thrive in that world? You need basically to electrify the whole economy. That means you need basically EVs. You need all the kind of power you can get. I'm for all of the above, by the way. And if it's an AI world, you want to be attracting the best intellectual brain power in the world. So what is Trump's policy in this? It's what I call, first of all, right-wing woke on EV. Oh, EV, electric vehicles? No, that's for sissies. Real men don't do that. So we're just going to get rid of EVs, okay, at a time when China is about to take over that industry in the world. And it's basically throw every STEM, science, technology graduate he can find out of the country and destroy as many of our great research institutions, from the National Science Foundation to the National Institute of Health. How is that in any way related to where the world is going? And that's my problem with this bill. It's not this provision or that provision. It's based on nothing but a collection of incoherent gut instincts from a president who hasn't spent 5 minutes thinking about where the world is actually going.
Remember, you've been saying for years and years, Tom, not only should we be welcoming those foreign students to our universities, but when they graduate, staple a green card to the back of their diploma so they stay here, create products and jobs here. Let's talk about